Hey guys, so Miss Taylor here. We're going to talk about the Washington administration, 1789 to 1797. So Washington is now president. He is faced with a massive challenge as president, right? A lot of challenges are now he's having to deal with. He knew that every decision he would make would be invested with special significance. So during the summer of 1789, Congress created executive departments corresponding to those formed under the Constitution. Specifically, the State Department, which handled relations with other nations, the Treasury Department, which dealt with financial issues, and the War Department, which provided the nation's defense. Now, the head of these departments are as follows. The State Department was headed by Thomas Jefferson. The Department of Treasury was Alexander Hamilton, and the Secretary of War was Henry Knox. Now, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson did not get along very well. And that's putting it mildly. Thomas Jefferson often referred to Hamilton as a monarchist. These gentlemen did not get along. Hamilton was a Federalist. He had a strong belief in a strong central government. Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. They believed in the individual. They believed in a stronger state government. Jefferson is also an agriculturalist. He believes in the farmers, and he believes they are the backbone of America. They did not get along, and that's putting it mildly. Now, you also have the establishment of the first Supreme Court, as well as the first Chief Justice, which is John Jay. Now, John Jay becomes important later when we discuss Jay's Treaty, but at the time, he is promoted to Chief Justice and appointed by George Washington. Now, in 1776, the same year that Americans are declaring their independence, Adam Smith writes a revolutionary book called The Wealth of Nations. It provided the full description of what would come to be called a modern capitalist society and economy. The work was a sort of declaration from Great Britain's mercantilist system. See, under mercantilism, national governments had exercised tight control over economic life. So Smith was arguing that instead of controlling economic activity, governments should allow individuals and businesses to compete freely for profit in the marketplace, so a free market system. Now, this idea is greatly admired by Alexander Hamilton. He is greatly influenced by Smith's The Wealth of Nations. So as Secretary of the Treasury, he takes charge of managing the nation's complicated financial affairs. So he has a plan because we are born in debt. The War for Independence, we had borrowed heavily from the Dutch and the French. After the war, we have to find a way to pay these debts. But there is no national bank. There is no national currency. In essence, the American Republic is broke. So Hamilton has got to get creative in thinking of a way to balance the budget. So, his first thought is that the national government should assume the state debts. He also wants to establish a national bank. And he wants to be creating a protection tariff so that we can protect the imports. Now, governments have 4 basic ways to pay their bills. They impose taxes on individuals and businesses. They levy tariffs. That's number 2, which are taxes on imported goods. Number 3, they borrow money by selling interest-paying government bonds to investors. We do this today. China typically purchases our interest-paying bonds so that we have money into our economy. And then number 4 is simply to print more money. So under Hamilton's leadership, the U.S. did all of these things and more. So he is trying to quickly raise money to get us out of debt. Now, Hamilton's very far-sighted when he is proposing these things. And it leads to a lot of controversy. In part because many people do not understand the complexities of economics. So James Madison, who is a close ally of his, is actually against him in assuming the state debts. It ignites a debate in Congress. They are arguing back and forth. Now, James Madison had been taught under Jefferson. They were all friends. So eventually Hamilton doesn't give up, though. He's like, look, he goes to Jefferson and he says, you've got to help me. So Jefferson invites Hamilton and Madison to his home for dinner. By the end of the dinner, there's the compromise. It's the Compromise of 1790, and it goes like this. Hamilton can have his assumption of the state debts. They can raise money through taxes and tariffs and all that. As long as they move the nation's capital from New York City to Philadelphia for the next 10 years, and then they will move it to a new city that has been built in those 10 years, that will be located in a federal district sandwiched between Maryland and Virginia. So 10 years later, after they moved, the nation's capital settled into a new city, Washington, in the federal district of Columbia. So they each got what they wanted, and they were able to work it out. Now, Hamilton's debt funding scheme actually works. Bonds are quickly snatched up by investors. You have new loans flowing in from European governments. They are building money very quickly. After securing congressional approval for his debt funding scheme, he calls for a national bank modeled after the Bank of England. So this, once again, sets him at odds with Jefferson, Jefferson argues that the Constitution says nothing of creating a national bank. The government could not start one because it didn't. So Hamilton has a good argument, though. Now, what ends up happening is you have the Bank of the United States, or the BUS, is established, and it has 3 primary responsibilities. 1, to hold the government's funds and pay its bills. 2, to provide loans to the federal government and to other banks to promote economic development. And 3, to manage the nation's money supply by regulating the power of state-chartered banks to issue currency or banknotes. So they're controlling the way the states are pushing out funds because they've been very irresponsible in the past. Industrialization, Hamilton believed, would bring diversification to the American economy because they are dangerously dependent on imported British goods. So, to foster industrial development, Hamilton recommended that the federal government increase tariffs on imports because 3/4 of them come from Britain. So they're trying to provide financial incentives to key industries such as wool and cotton, window glass. To such governmental support, he claimed, would enable new industries to compete on equal terms. So he's trying to create protective tariffs to protect industries so that they can develop. He also wants Congress to fund major transportation improvements, including the development of roads, canals, and harbors. So his leadership is monumental. It actually works. They begin paying off revolutionary debts, Foreign capitalists and bank invest heavily in the American economy. European nations, as well as even China, begin growing trade with the United States. He upsets a lot of people, but he gets the job done. He's very much a visionary in developing the American economy and society modeled on that of Britain. Now, Jefferson prefers the example of France, but the two men, though were remarkably different in the hopes for the nation's economic difference, they both were powerhouses in helping to develop the way the economy did. Now, Hamilton had established that national tax. And it includes one on whiskey, specifically distilled spirits. This is in 1791. It's issued, and there's a lot of resistance among cash-poor farmers throughout the western frontier. This is because it had been used as a form of currency, and now they have a tax on it. So in the summer of 1794, discontent exploded into open rebellion in western Pennsylvania, home to a fourth of the nation's whiskey stills. Angry farmers threatened assault nearby Pittsburgh. They loot the homes of the rich, and they set the town ablaze. After negotiations failed, George Washington told them either knock it off or he would send the militia. When the rebels don't respond, he himself dons his military uniform and rode on horseback to greet the soldiers. It is the first and last time a sitting president leads the troops in the field. Now, it panics the Whiskey Rebellion when you see all of these soldiers plus military men in the field, and they vanish into the hills. So the rebellion collapses. But while this is going on, you also have Washington dealing with Native Americans. The relationship is a significant problem for the administration under Washington. The 1790 Naturalization Act made clear that Native Americans were not U.S. citizens. So, he's moving to protect the white settlers west of the Appalachian Mountains. After the War of Independence, white settlers had poured into these lands. In 1794, General Anthony Wayne defeated a combined force of Native Americans, that was the Western Confederacy, a loose alliance of tribes, at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. With the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, the Western Confederacy gives up their claims to Ohio. They sign away their rights. But not even just that was going on during his presidency. See, in 1792, Washington was unanimously reelected for his second term. But he quickly finds himself dealing with the consequences of the French Revolution, which I will cover in part 2 of this video.